Hello, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile. This is a show where we get to talk about sports, we get to talk about business, and we get to talk about everything in between. Wherever you're listening, however you're listening, you know exactly what to do. Like and subscribe on YouTube, 5-star review on Apple, and maybe say some nice words, and then an easy 5-star review over on Spotify. But, of course, the most important piece of this is my incredible guest. Today I have Chris Cason. He's a journalist and an athlete marketing specialist. Chris, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. I'm excited, man. I say it constantly on the show, and it's how I reached out to you. If I could do this for the rest of my life, I'd be the happiest person on earth. If I could just interview people, interview athletes on the cool shit that they're doing in sports and get paid for it, I'd be the happiest person on planet Earth. Now, I'm sure it's not as easy as it sounds, right? I'm sure you're going to lay into us a little bit and really give us what the behind the scenes is. But on the forefront, man, it sounds sweet, right? Let me be Joe Rogan. I'll do 3-hour-long podcasts. It's my favorite thing. Like, that's easy. Like, we'll see what we could do there. I'm not going to keep you for 3 hours, Chris. Don't you worry. Probably about 30 to 45, but excited for the conversation. So, Chris, the first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
I think it's one of the really, there's a few things in life that brings all types of, cultures and backgrounds together. And sports is one of that. I grew up as a Chicago Bulls fan, and literally you can go to Spain and, Barcelona, just with the globalization of the game. There are Bulls fans all over the globe. And it's the one thing that, I think in society, there's so many things in societies that are meant to separate us. And I think sports is one of those unifying factors, no matter what creed or background or whatever your religious beliefs are. If you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. You can have a beer with, that guy who you probably wouldn't speak to on the street. You can have a beer alongside that guy during the game. So, and just the amount of storytelling that just with the rich history of these organizations, with the players that have played for them, just even people's path in getting to work for those organizations. It's just all things that I love. Everybody has a unique story, but sports is just one of those things that, brings all these different walks of life together.
Absolutely, man. It's definitely something that I say on this show a lot. If there's someone, if I'm anywhere in the world and I see someone in a Mets hat, I'm going to go say something to him. I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what language they speak, right? But I'm going to 100% point to his hat, point to my shirt, give him a fist pump, whatever it is. Like, I 100% will do that. And there's just something inherent about that, unifying factor, that community, that just built in community, right? Like when I grew up, that's all my friends were the people that I played sports with, right? Like you kind of gravitate towards the conversations. How'd the Giants do today? Actually, they won. That was pretty cool, right? So it's so easy to have those conversations, and I love the fact that you bring up the storytelling too, right? The storytelling. I'm sure every Bulls fan that you've ever met, right? They all are going to have just a slightly different version of the story of what Michael Jordan did that one time, right? But there's something so pure and beautiful about that, because we all hold that a specific memory in that moment so near and dear to us, and yet none of us are really right about it. We all, at the end, we can look at the box score, but the way that moment felt, the way that made us feel, there's nothing like it.
Absolutely. And that's the most important things, like how sports makes us feel. I mean, there are people who are lifers, a bad Bears game could ruin a guy's Sunday and Monday, until that next game, but he's still going to watch. Like, how long did it take, Cubs fans, think 100 years before they celebrated another World Series victory? And all those years in between, fans continue to come to the games, fans continue to buy tickets. So it's just one of those things, we ride and die with sports, pretty much. So it's just one of those things that we have to feel a part of it. When those teams do good, we feel vindicated in a way, just for, having this lifelong, like, just relationship with this club. So I don't know when the Bulls will ever get back to that point, but I'm pretty sure, having a chance to cover them, but I'm pretty sure once they do get back to that echelon in sports and they win something, it's going to be a very gratifying moment for me.
Oh, I'm sure you and all the people around the world wearing that hat, man. Like there's 100% something about it, right? It is so interesting. And as I said, I'm a Mets fan, so yeah, I live and die
Oh,
every
absolutely.
year by this shit
Yeah.
team that hates me, right? Like they hate me. They do everything to put me in the ground, and every year I'm just like, nope. I love you more than my wife. I love you more than my family, right? Like, it's a little facetious, but at the same time, like the Mets are, they just lost recently. I haven't been very happy. It is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it, and I don't want that to change, honestly, because that's why we're human. We want to feel things, right? But
Absolutely.
hopefully, man, it'll be worth it when they do win that one time. So we'll see what happens. But not enough about me. No one cares about me. You're here. We're here talking to Chris Cason, and I'm excited to learn. So you grew up a Bulls fan, and at least on LinkedIn, one of your first jobs I could find was that you actually covered the Bulls. Now, that seems like an exception to the rule, right? Not everyone I don't know every Mets fan that wanted to become a sports writer immediately went out and started covering the Mets. So I'm really curious, like, especially in a very competitive and a very high demand, high supply field like sports writing, right? Pretty much anyone that has a mom's basement is putting something on the internet these days.
Yeah.
How does that opportunity come about, and how are you able to go and seize it?
Oh, well, it wasn't easy. My background is very non-traditional. So my writing career can be traced back to just the connections I made in college. I'm going to date myself just a little bit, but I'll try to condense this story as much as possible. So when Facebook first started out, as opposed to reaching out to former classmates that I went to grammar school and high school with, I had grew up reading Slam Magazine, Soul Collector, Inside Stuff Magazine, all of these different publications, and I already knew I kind of had an interest in sports writing. I didn't know how to get into it, what I would do, but I knew the people who could get me close to that were the actual people who I grew up reading. So Scoop Jackson, I grew up reading Nick DePaula, Anthony Gilbert. I mean, me and Nick DePaula are kind of in the same age range. So, but I was still reading his work. So I started adding them on Facebook, like just out of the blue. And, every once in a while I would hit them up, pick their brains and things like that. And just from that connection through Anthony Gilbert, he started working with a company called MVN, Most Valuable Sports Network. And essentially, they were just like a company started in Philly as a blog. They pretty much had beats for all of these different writers. There was like no credentialing at all. You were essentially, it was pretty much just blogging. It was like the first iteration of blogging. So I will watch Anthony Gilbert introduce me to John Burkett over there. John Burkett say, all right, you can cover the Bulls. So watch games, write recaps, give my opinion on things. And in about 2008 or a little bit before that, the examiner.com started up, and they reached out to me because they had been reading some of my work at MVN. I didn't think anybody read any of the stuff I did. I would just write it, post it to Facebook. I don't even think Twitter was around back then. So just posting it on Facebook, starting conversations with people, comment people that would comment. I would interact with them in the comment section. So the Examiner came along and they wanted me to do the same thing for their site. And I was like, you know what? I really can't just jump ship like that. They gave me my writing opportunity over here. I was like, hey, the only way I would leave is if you guys fight, for credentialing for me. I had been independently fighting the league and the Chicago Bulls to be credentialed. I'm pretty sure they got tired of me because it was like every other month I was writing the Bulls, I was writing the NBA. It's like, hey, can I just cover, just a practice? Just give me practice and, I'll figure it out from there. And they would always turn me down, rightfully, because, it's just a small blog that not too many people were aware of. But the Examiner fought for me, and my first credentialed event was the 2008 NBA Draft Combine. So that would be my rookie classes: Steph Curry, Blake Griffin, DeMar DeRozan, James Harden, Taj Gibson, the guys in that draft. And from that, I did a good job with that, covering that. And then, the Bulls, seeing that I had been credentialed, they gave me access to some preseason games. And, once I got in there, it was pretty much just show and prove, show that I was serious, show that I wasn't, in there trying to take up space or not doing work. So I got in there and pretty much started covering, just started covering the team on a part-time basis. So that path is so untraditional. So even when people reach out to me like, "Hey, how did you do it?" Usually back then, you had to go from high school, college to maybe sports, or you had to have some type of internship. I had none of that, like at all. I essentially went from blogging to, all right, now you're in the NBA locker rooms. Now it's about covering the team. Now it's about trying to figure out, how my content can deviate eyes from the Chicago Tribunes, the Chicago Sun-Times, the ESPNs, the Comcast, and that was the next challenge after that. So my path was very, very different, but once it it was essentially like how I've kind of lived my life. I got in there by hustling, once I got in there, it was just about creating another hustle, in terms of reaching out to all of these publications I grew up reading, um, and just contributing. I'm in NBA locker room, so you have access to all of these unique personalities. There's different stories to tell outside of what those guys do for a living. So that's pretty much my writing career in a nutshell.
I love it, man. And yeah, that
Yeah,
is very unique. And I think it's important for people to understand. It's not all paths are linear, right? Like they're
no, not at
if
all.
and the one thing, another thing about this industry that I do bring up occasionally is you have to be doing something before someone's going to hire you to do it. Right, I don't expect. Like, I would not have expect to be like, oh, I want to be a podcaster. Someone hired me to do it. They're gonna be like, well, how many times have you done it up? Like, how many episodes have you done? Zero.
Yeah.
Well, why would we hire you? And in your case, right, it was blogging and it was reaching out and it was, hey, how do you do this? So I'm curious, was this a full time gig were you working on the side or was this your side work? Like, how are you able to? It didn't sound like this was the highest paying job. I don't need to know your dollar
No, not
numbers,
at
but
all.
how are you able to continue to live your life?
Yeah, so when I started with the Examiner, that was in 2008, there was a period where I was working a full-time job still because the Examiner had a pay per view type of model. So as long as I hit a certain viewership number, then you get paid, whatever. And it wasn't much at all. It's probably, I probably only hit that viewership model, like I hit it consistently, but it was probably good for like a couple of $100, out the month. So enough to supplement my income. I was going to work full time, and I think I was finishing up school full time at the time. So I look back now at that moment and realize like, yo, how did I do that? You got 15, 16 credit hours in school. You're going to work for 9 hours out the day, and then you're still trying to balance your schedule to still make it out to Northbrook, which is about 45, 50 minutes away from the city, to cover a practice, or, try to work your schedule out in a way to where you can go to evening games, and get work done. So it was just a grind. I definitely wasn't making a living off of the things that I was doing, but, I loved it, being around an organization that I grew up, watching, and getting to talk to some of the players I grew up watching. And now you have this, I'm coming in at the time where, Joakim Noah, Kirk Heinrich is there, Derrick Rose, it's his second year. There's this new iteration of the Bulls who are forming their own identity. I'm coming in right at that time, and I'm a part of helping, shape that narrative of what those guys were about. So I never looked at me not getting paid what everybody else was getting paid, as like a downfall, because it was like a master class every time I got to step inside the United Center. I'm getting to watch how a Sam Smith is working. I'm getting to watch how a Casey Johnson, who's been there, forever, is working. Nick Friedel, Agre Sam, Lacey J. Banks, guys that I grew up reading. I'm getting a chance to like watch them now, and I took that as this is my internship, but I'm learning on the fly, and I have pretty much a front seat to the best teachers, you know, imaginable, guys that have been in the league and writing for, a lifetime. And I'm getting a chance to watch them, talk to them, learn from them. So I looked at that as my payment as opposed to, just a dollar amount.
Yeah, that seems like it's much more valuable than the couple
Absolutely.
$100. I'm sure the travel costs alone would kind of just take up the couple $100 at that point.
Man,
So in that
easily.
case, like I think it's really important. Oh yeah, yeah, dude, I love it. And I think it, again, just important for people to understand like you're gonna have to sacrifice like how you did 15 or 16 credit hours and worked a full time job by itself. That's an insane amount of work. Then throw in,
Yeah,
oh yeah, and now I'm also covering a professional basketball team, one of the most famous professional basketball teams pretty much in the
yeah,
entire world, I'd say. Yeah, I'm sure a lot. It's you can't really mail in those pieces of content that you were doing. You have to put in that effort, and as you said, you have to learn from some of those around you. You made a comment a little earlier, how to divert eyes, right? You got paid by people viewing your content. How did
yep.
you how were you learning from all these incredible writers and people in the press box and people that you looked up to? How were you able to learn from them and also make sure you were putting your own twist on things to be able to essentially say, "Hey, I would love to learn something from you, but I also need a couple of those eyeballs that are watching yours, so I'm gonna have to, you know, make it your own." Because I actually need to get paid because gas is expensive. Like, how are you able to kind of finesse that situation?
Well, I don't think I never looked at it as a finesse. I always approached each person that, I wanted to learn something from as, you know, pretty much I'm just trying to be good, at this, be great. Like, I respect what you do and, I'll watch you work. Like, hey, how should I handle this? Or how should I, handle this? And, the sports world, even when you go into beat writing. It's competitive because, you may have working relationships, amongst those guys, but this is a competitive industry. If this beat writer breaks a story and this beat writer doesn't, I'm pretty sure the editors email him like, yo, how's he getting all of this stuff at? You've been there longer, things like that. So I just always, whether I'm going to Sam Smith or Casey Johnson, I'll ask them certain things about, hey, how would you approach a guy who has had a bad shooting game, and you're trying to pull something out of him to convey that to your readers on why he's struggling, what is he going through, and another thing that helping me is I think I came along at a time where those guys were all in my like age range. So I knew how to talk to Derrick Rose because I'm a kid from Chicago. He's a kid from Chicago. So I knew how to talk to him. Same thing with guys like Joakim, Luau Deng. You observe them and then you kind of figure out like, all right, well, this is how I approach him. This is what he enjoys doing off the court. So, I was always a sponge. I would get to the arena right when the media gates would open at 3:30. So I'm there when the lights are off, essentially, on the court. The Benny the Bull is practicing at that time. The Lover Bulls are practicing that thing, and you're starting to get a sense of who comes in first to, get their work, to get their shots up, who's coming in last. Like, and just from that time of sitting on the bench, just watching all of this stuff unfold on game days, you start striking up relationships with the assistant coaches, all the people who put in the work behind the scenes that are helping this player break out of a slump, guys who are helping his players get better. And that helped me a lot because now I had little tidbits that I can share, like after a game recap, like, hey, this is how player X broke out of a shooting slump. He's been staying after games and working with, an Adrian Griffin or something like that. So um, I think those guys, it was such, the examiner.com was such a small and new publication that those guys probably didn't view me as a threat, and I didn't want them to view me as a threat. I just wanted to find my niche, find what I was good at, find something that guys were willing to talk to me about that nobody else was talking to them about, and then just go from there. So I just approached it from a different angle than just talking to them about their job all the time. My thing was always talking to them about the little small human interest angles of things, and then building stories off of that. Because when you look at beat writing as a whole, you're essentially kind of everybody's writing the same thing. You can have like 7 to 8 guys assigned to a beat, and literally you're talking to the same guys, you're getting the same quote, You may ask a different question or something like that, but you're essentially writing almost the same story day by day. But what's going to separate you from those others? Do you add humor into it? Do you put something else in there that these other guys aren't, that keep readers, attached to what you have to say.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of looking at it, right? The opportunity to just be able to put your own personal spin on it. And I'm always curious. I've never actually asked a beat writer this before. I've had multiple on the show. Never got to ask anybody this. You're going to have to say mean or bad things about someone, right? Like if someone has a bad night or makes a terrible foul or makes a boneheaded play, like you can only beat around the bush so much without saying it. And then the next day you're expected to go back in there and, continue that relationship with that person. And athletes are humans, right? Like they're
Yeah.
people. No one likes hearing that, yeah, this person, Chris called me an idiot, right? Like obviously you're not being a little facetious about it, but like how are you able to continue those relationships and make sure that they stayed strong while also making sure that you were doing your job and being, saying what needed to be said to the people that read your stories?
Yeah. That's kind of like, I think every beat writer struggles with that balance, but I think most players are mature enough to know that as long as you're not disrespecting them, as a person, or, like you said, if you're referring to them as a name or something like that, I think most players know that, hey, this is your job. You have to report on that. You have to ask certain tough questions about it. And then it's all up to the player on how they want to answer it. I had an issue, incident with a player once, and, I wrote something kind of critiquing like a certain pairing players that I didn't think would work out. And, the player kind of was giving me the cold shoulder, like I would say probably for like 2 weeks. And with me just working home games, sometimes going on the road to, like a Milwaukee or an Indianapolis or a Cleveland, like it becomes noticeable. It's like, yo, what did I do to this? Did I say something? And, I finally pulled the player to the side, like after a media scrum, and asked, like, hey, are we good? Did I say something? And he mentioned something that I had written like maybe 3 weeks, ago. And I didn't, at that time, I was still naive to think players didn't care what was being written, especially when it comes to game recaps. But the ones that care and actually love what they're doing, they read everything. So, it was pretty much like, you know, just setting the
Mm-hmm.
table and like, hey, you could have come to me and I could have broke that down for you better, as opposed to you kind of writing about it as if you know the ins and out of it. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. Next time, it was a learning experience for me.
Yeah.
That's always the interesting dynamic in these locker rooms now, because these guys there's so many eyes on them at all times. And now with social media, so much of their life is, out in public. So I think their sanctuary is what they do. And, when you have somebody that may critique something you did, especially when it's bad, it's a long season, they kind of feel, they're sensitive, they're humans, like you just said. So they're going to have a problems with it. But I think what athletes can do is, just have a conversation. Like if you didn't like something or you felt you could added better context to it, hey, pull that writer to the side and, hash it out. But at the end of the day, the beat reporter is just there to do a job. Like if he's not attacking a person's character, or, nobody's getting called out their name, or their professionalism isn't being criticized if not warranted, then it shouldn't be an issue.
And that makes sense. Yeah, as you said, most athletes are mature human beings, right? Like, yeah, there's a bunch of 19-year-old kids, especially in the NBA, right? But most
Oh
athletes,
yeah.
and if all beat writers are writing the same thing, I mean, that's just going to be especially on bad teams, that's just going to be a long season. That's no fun for anybody. So, yeah, there's two sides to there's two sides to that relationship, and understanding that. I think as long as athletes get that, and as long as you said, you use it as a learning experience, and I'm sure your pieces then got better because you realized, hey, wait, rather than just assuming, I should go to this guy and just be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. You tell me if this is right, if this is wrong, or if you have another opinion on it. And then that adds even more context. That adds even more flavor to your content than you just being like, I just don't think this will work, right? And then going into your
Absolutely.
critication of it. So I think that's pretty cool. And yeah, it's a good learning experience for everybody. So I think that's pretty important. And we keep talking about the human aspect of this, which I think is really important. And especially in the NBA, you see it more, I would say, at least I do as Joe Public, see it more than anywhere else. Our NBA stars are the most, I guess they're the biggest stars, right? Like outside of like
Hmm.
Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes in the NFL, yeah, there's Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Outside of quarterbacks, I guess is a good way to say it in
Yeah,
the NFL. And baseball's terrible at marketing their stars. And I love
very
hockey,
true.
but it's the smallest of the big four. Let's be honest. It's basketball and stars go hand in hand. I don't care. I don't have a team to root for. I just root for LeBron, right? Like not anymore because I'm
Hmm.
kind of over his shit, but like yeah, like I root for LeBron. I root for Steph Curry. Like I root for the stars. Like I don't care what team they're on. I'm rooting for them. And you brought
Yep.
up a point before with your writing that you want to add in that human element, that human aspect. And now with what you're doing, right, we can kind of transition from what you were doing with the Bulls to kind of what you're doing now. And it's a bunch of different things, but I've read some of your pieces. Obviously, you just had one recently with John Cena. I saw some stuff you had with Trey Young. You have a bunch of different stuff
Oh
out there
yeah.
with a lot of different athletes. I'm curious, how did you make that transition from being a beat writer to saying I kind of want to go into more? I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but more long form, more like player focused content and star focused content, interview type content. How do you decide to make that transition, and how do you even go about it?
Yeah. So, like, I think I mentioned this before. I grew up reading slam magazines. I can't count the number of times in, grammar school and high school that I got in trouble for, reading, slam magazine. Going to high school, I had a long commute. I would read the Chicago Sun-Times, the sports section. But Slam Magazine was it for me. To me, it's still whole. Whenever I get an assignment in Slam Magazine, I pretty much take it with the utmost seriousness just because of how much that publication meant to me. Specifically, the work of, Russ Bankston and, Scoop Jackson. Like those guys told stories in a way that you don't get from just reading, the clippings from the paper. So I always wanted to do that, and I knew, you know, it sounds like they were cool with the athlete. They weren't just writing about what they were doing, but they were spending 2 weeks at a time with them. That's obviously not the case now with how access is, kind of divvied up. But at some point during the beat writing thing, I think it was around I always attribute this to Derrick Rose. It was when he was going through, I believe, the meniscus injury, like right after the torn ACL. He was in the locker room one day. I think we're interviewing. I can't remember who we were interviewing, but he like asked the question out loud. He's like, "Do you guys write the same thing like every day?" I was like, "You know what? Yeah, kind of do." And you could just see the way the media landscape was changing, how access was being divvied up. Like, there's only so many times a guy wants to talk about. You got to think about these guys are experts at what they're doing. They're professionals. So trying to break like terminologies and different things down and put it in a way to 20 to 30 people after a game, after a loss, is something they don't want to do, but it's a requirement of the job. So I wanted to start talking to guys about what they were interested in, what makes them tick, what goes into, what we all see, when the lights come on. So, like I said, I started reaching out to, publications about, hey, I'm in this locker room, I can start talking to, player X about, his signature line, his signature footwear line. So I started with Soul Collector, doing the series, and then started doing work with Complex, Nice Kicks, now GQ. So, and then the crazy part is, when I first got in the door, I spoke with everybody. It could be the guy sweeping and mopping the floor. It could be the security outside of, the locker room. Like I talked to everybody just because, everybody there is important because they're all there to pretty much help the show go on in some capacity. So everybody in that building is important. Those people sweeping up the stadium after the game is over, the people breaking down the stadium seating, to put the ice up there for the Blackhawks, everybody's important. So I never like put my head down or held my nose up too high when walking past people. But going back to your question about how did I get started, just reaching out to publications. I was a nerd in that I would still go to Barnes and Noble, all of these magazines that I enjoy reading. Boom, crack the magazine open, go right to the masthead. Who's the executive editor? Who's the deputy editor? Okay, man, I'm gonna go to Facebook, now Twitter, and like, I'm gonna reach out to them and see if, there could be some synergy there. So that's what I did. Pretty much just started reaching out to editors, say, hey, this is what I could do. This is what I could have access to. Let's see if we can find a way to make it work. And, in a nutshell, and that's kind of how it's, worked for me. I mean, and now when you look at there's so much accessibility to things now, to where with kids, you can reach out to, an exec at a team and like, hey, can I pick your brain for 5 minutes? You can do that through LinkedIn. You can do that still through Facebook. There's so many avenues now for people to reach out to, whoever, and get, 8-10 minutes of their time. That, it's crazy. I wish I had that, when I was coming around. I don't know if it would have made me feel like things should be easier. It kind of takes away from people, hustling and doing the work, but there's so many avenues now for like students now to reach out to, these people in sports and start picking their brain just to see like, hey, I have an interest in this, but you actually do this and have been doing it for 10 years. Can I hear about your experience? And that will make me realize like, hey, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to shift focus to, some over here.
Yeah, and I tell, when I go and speak with college students, I always tell them, like, if you're not reaching out to a minimum of one person on LinkedIn a day, you're not doing it right. Like, right? You did the hustle aspect of it, right? Where you're going to Barnes and Noble, you're writing down all these people's names and finding them on the internet, and yeah, it's so much easier now. So essentially, you have a more opportunity to hustle now. So if you really want to,
Absolutely.
there's still so much out there for students, for young professionals to go and be able to do. And personally, for me, I just like talking to people, as you can say. And as you said, hey, I reached out for a couple minutes of your time so far. I got about 30 of it, so I do appreciate that, Chris. A couple more coming.
Yeah, no problem.
Really do appreciate that. And I think it's just important for people to understand. And going back to a point that you made before, right, and realizing in sports, and we brought it up in the beginning, everybody's got a story. I want to hear the story of the guy that swept up the confetti after the Super Bowl, after the NBA Finals. That guy has a story, right? The guy that's been sweeping up that floor for 40 friggin' years, and he's been doing it every single night after the game, and he goes home to his wife, and he talks about how much he loves his job, and then one time he finally gets to sweep up that confetti, right? Like, you're telling me that guy doesn't have such an unbelievable connection with the team that he's been working for and the players that he's been seeing in and out and the executives that keep coming through the door and they leave and then you get new ones, right? But this guy's still here. Write that story, Chris, because that actually sounds awesome. So, hey, take that one for what it is. But I'm sure that's an awesome story because everyone in sports, whether you're the highest of the high, the lowest of the low on the totem pole, you got a cool story. I can guarantee it, which I think that's why we love this thing, man. That's why we love
Absolutely.
it. And I, again, appreciate you coming on. I'll keep going. I'm sorry. If you have a thought, rock with it.
No, and another thing I tell kids is it's one thing to be a fan of sports, but I tell kids now, especially with social media, watch what you say about teams, players, on social media, because that could, your future boss could be potentially like watching what you say on there. So if it's one thing to say, oh, he's a bum, but when you go on to these personal attacks and you're horribly criticizing the team and the organization, like, we're at a time in society where everything you say really can be used against you. So you may have tweets from 6-7 years ago that you're a different person, obviously, at that time. But if you're saying some pretty disparaging things about, a player, about a team or an organization, your future boss could be looking at that. So, it's so important that I think these kids now recognize, like, social media is nothing but, a running resume. It's a look into, who you are, and who you're trying to portray yourself to be. So, if you're coming across as anything that you wouldn't want to project yourself to, a future boss, you probably, save that for, your close friends or whatever. You don't want to be putting that out into the world because, like I said, your future boss, will definitely see that.
Yeah, not a good idea. Go back, delete everything. I tried to delete every single thing that I ever put on Facebook because whatever I did when I was 15, like that, I'm not that person anymore. Whatever I did, I was 18 or 19 or 20, 21, I'm not that person anymore. So, you know what? I read some of it. It wasn't great, so I just deleted it. Like, right? And it was just stupid stuff that kids do. And like, I'm not gonna say it was like the smartest thing in the world. Obviously, it wasn't. And unfortunately, right, your parents are right again. Don't put stuff on the internet that you don't want people to see, right? And that's coming to fruition. We see it
Absolutely.
constantly with athletes. We see it constantly with just, executives that don't really know how the internet works, right? We see it all the time. So yeah, just go back, delete all of it. Just delete all
Absolutely.
of it. None of it means anything. It never really did mean anything. So just delete all of it. It's probably for the best. And I think that's pretty
Absolutely.
important. So I guess I'm curious, like when at what point do you get comfortable enough to say, okay, well, all right, I graduated from school. I don't really want to do this 9 to 5 anymore. I just want to be a beat writer. I just want to write these stories with these athletes. Like how at what point are you able to finally say, like, I think I'll be okay if I just continue to get work this way, especially because this is what I love to do and this is what I want to do anyway.
Yeah, I don't think, as a freelancer, as a guy who, does a lot of contract work, you never really, get to a feeling of being comfortable at all. You always kind of, you're always chasing the next story. You're trying to see, what's next. And that's where the excitement for me comes from. You know, a story may come out by the time a lot of people see stuff that I've written. I'm already 4 or 5 stories past that. I might have done that a month ago, and it's just releasing, for whatever reason, a month later. Just if it's an announcement about something, if it's something with an embargo. So I think just for me, like the the beauty is just in like that journey of the next story. So while I want to say I get comfortable, I've always been in love with the process of the challenge of the next story. Like with GQ, the real life diet series. It can kind of seem like it's pretty monotonous in terms of the subject because you're talking to athletes and entertainers and celebrities about their diet, training. But the beauty is what makes you tick, not as opposed to like what makes athletes tick in general. What do you eat? How do you train? What time are you waking up? Like what's specific to you? And getting that insight, I think, gives fans and readers just a different insight into these guys because, like I said, we all see these guys, when they're at their best, and after all of these hours and days of preparation, if it's a football player, there's 6 days that goes into what you see on Sunday. There's this whole recovery on Monday and Tuesday. There's practice on a Wednesday. Thursday, there's film. Friday, practice. Saturday, there's more prep work. And then there's the game on Sunday. Same thing with the NBA. It's an 82 game season. Same thing with the NHL. We only see these guys when, it's time to go to work. We don't see all of these things that go into the 50-point nights, the 4 or 5 touchdown throws performance. So, you just have to search for the details that nobody else is conveying. And it's a challenge, but it's also what keeps me going is trying to pull these little tidbits out from guys just to relay that to readers because it just gives you insight to say, hey, this guy is, obviously genetically and athletically gifted, but he doesn't skip the details. This is what he's doing, to go out there and, put on the best performances. He cares that much to do this, to avoid eating this, to be at his best, on game night.
I think so many people in like the public, we don't. You're 100% right. We don't realize all the work that goes into it. Oh, this guy's naturally talented. Okay, yeah, he's naturally talented, but yeah, you know how many hours of work he put in to make sure that he's
Countless.
maximizing his talent, right? Like it, and there's so many people. Oh, he's lucky. Oh, she's lucky to have this or that. It's like, or did they, wake up at 5 in the morning and do everything that they needed to do in the day before you even got out of bed, right? And like, hey, that's just the people, that's the public, and it's very easy to kind of fall into that trap. So that's always something that I hate doing is when if one of my friends is like, oh, they're so lucky, I can't believe they got to do that or this, that, and the other things. Like, Well, they probably deserved it, right? In very few
Hmm.
situations did that person or all of these people, like, how many of them actually just got kind of randomly pulled out of a hat and was like, okay, you're going to be the best. You don't have to put any work into it. Even the best put the most work in, right? You hear about LeBron James and what
Yep.
he does to his body, right? Like all of these things, they're putting in so much unbelievable work, and it's cool to see and cool to hear that you're able to go in and figure that out and give people that behind the scenes, because I think people love the behind the scenes, right? The
Yeah.
old saying is no one wants to know how the sausage was made, but in reality, I think especially now with like the athlete focus and the star driven just content, like people want to know how the sausage was made. They want to know where
Absolutely.
the pig grew up and what the pig was eating right before the sausage was
Hmm.
even made. So like I think that stuff is just so interesting, and it really lends you to be able to actually understand who these people are a little bit more, and really, obviously I'm never going to meet LeBron James. Hey, maybe I do one day. That'd be cool, but at least I know kind of a little bit more about him through writing and podcasts and video content and everything that's kind of going on. That it makes it just, I don't know. There's more of a connection. I can find more pieces to connect myself to LeBron, because in reality, there are very few pieces of anything that could connect me with LeBron, right?
Absolutely. I've been, um, I don't take my career for granted because, when you say things like that, I've had the opportunity to go up to LeBron, pull him to the side, like, hey, can you tell me, what you've played against Tom Thibodeau's defense for this many years? Like, how do you try, without giving, away your secrets, what's great about his defense and what is it forces you to do? And, Kobe Bryant, is the same way, God rest his soul, being able to pull these guys to the side and just get that little bit of detail, it makes you it kind of shows you and separates the greats, the guys who care about what's going to be said about their name and legacy 20, 30, 40, 50 years, after they're done playing, and the guys who are just there because, hey, I'm talented, this is a great living, I'm able to provide for my family, I'm cool, I'm just trying to make it to the next check. So just kind of bridging the gaps and filling in all of these little details is something that I enjoy doing because access is so limited with guys now. And essentially, really, outside of beat reporting, I don't think athletes too much need media as, in years past, because their their audience really is their social media now. You can go live at any time and pull in hundreds of thousands of viewers to make an announcement about something, to show something that you're doing, and you don't have to consult with a publication or something like that at all. So just being able to be in a position to speak with these guys and be up close to them and figure out what makes them tick, is a privilege, and it's one I really don't take for granted at all.
I'm glad that you don't, man, because there's a lot of people listening and a lot of people out there that would probably pay to have your job, right? You get paid to do it, but I'm
Absolutely.
sure a lot of people would pay for that job, which is so cool. So,
Yeah.
again, kudos and congratulations. You do some awesome shit, man. You're going to keep doing it, and I'm grateful that you gave me a little bit of your time today. I mean, the last thing I want to talk to you about, I know you work with athletes in another sense, too, right? You're an athlete marketing specialist. Sounds pretty
Yeah.
fancy. I mean, maybe that's the writer in you, right? But I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, what exactly is an athlete marketing specialist? What are you doing? Who are you helping? How are you helping them? Just give me some generalities about that thing.
Yeah, essentially, so I'm not working with any specific athletes at the moment. COVID kind of slowed that business down a little bit, but essentially, I created my own company, Baseline Media. It's pretty much just my company of pretty much when I submitted an invoice or something, I would get paid, through my company. But as far as the media work goes with the marketing, let's say, I don't want to name names or disrespect anybody's sports agency, but say you have an agency, a big sports agency. You have player
Let's say
X
it's
and
three letters, a three-letter agency. Is that okay to say?
let's say four. Let's say four, not
Four.
to
Okay,
go to
perfect. How
specific.
perfect.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
yeah. Yeah.
sounds
So
good.
let's say they have player X and Y on their roster. They're obviously the top names in their individual sport. Well, those players A, B, C, D, they're kind of going to fall to the wayside of that because they're either in tier two or tier three. So all the resources are still going to player X and Y. So who's out there searching for opportunities for player A, B, and C. So I just saw an opportunity to get in there and start working with individual guys who may fall to that, tier two, tier three type, and get out there and, hey, what are your interests? What do you want to be known for? What audience do you want to get in front of? And work with those guys, work with writers who I've built relationships with, and pretty much just merge those together just to make it a win-win it's a win for all parties involved. It's a win for the writer, it's a win for the athlete, it's a win for the publication. So that's pretty much baseline media in a nutshell.
I mean, I think it's a very smart thing to do, right? You've been networking this whole time. We didn't really talk about networking too much explicitly, but you've been kind of implicit with talking about how you've been always going up to people, always talking to them, always trying to pick someone's brain. And I think it's important, right? You've been able to meet so many people over the years that you're able to start connecting those dots. And people like
Yeah.
connectors, man. Connectors are extremely important and very necessary in many places, right? The athlete's happy. Now the writer has a story. Now the brand, right? You didn't even mention the brand. I'm sure there's a brand potentially attached to it in some way,
Yep.
shape, or form, whether it's the athlete's just general brand or a brand that they're working with or the publication is working with, right? And the publication itself too. So just by giving, the just kind of stoking that flame a little bit, everybody's happy, everybody gets paid. Nobody's angry in that situation. And I think that's a really smart way of going about it because, yeah, I had a very similar idea when I started my business, when I worked with Olympic athletes and did pretty much the same exact thing where no one was giving them any love. They were getting nothing, so why not try and figure out ways to help them because they're still people. They still have incredible stories, and people still are going to be able to attach themselves to these athletes in some way, shape, or form. So, no, man, I think that's awesome. Sorry, COVID slowed it down a little bit. Hopefully, now that I don't know, someone said it's over, so why not? Hey, hopefully it gets picked up again a little bit, and you can figure that out again, man. But this is Chris. This has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you. And like going back to networking, like you said, never be scared to. I think when I've seen interns get into the locker room, and I know it could be an intimidating thing, or once you're around all of these professionals, it could be intimidating if you're an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid and you don't want to step on anybody's toes. But man, don't ever be scared to pull somebody aside respectfully or come up to somebody and just like, hey, I'm such and such. I think with social media and just all of these digital platforms, that's kind of taken away like just people feeling comfortable, like having a face to face conversation, with people or talking to somebody, face to face now. Never be scared to pull somebody to the side, ask them for 3 minutes of their time. And, it's up to that person to say yes or no, but you'll find out that a lot of people in sports business, even with how competitive it is, they're willing to give you, that 3 to 5 minutes of their time.
Or 48 in my case. So I do appreciate it again, man. I think it's
Absolutely.
important, dude. Like I'm a huge networker. I tell everybody how important it is. As I said, when I go speak to colleges, if you're not reaching out to one person a day on LinkedIn, there's no way you don't have 5 minutes. Like I don't care how busy your schedule is. Wake up 5 minutes earlier. There. I don't care what time you wake up.
Absolutely.
You can wake up 5 minutes earlier. You're waking up at 3. What's the difference between 3 and 2:55? Like get out of here. So you can find
Mhm.
5 minutes somewhere in your day to be able to reach out. Now, is that on LinkedIn? Is it on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook? Like old school, like you did, Chris. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, right? And you have to do that. You have to reach out. You have to find people where they are and just ask them questions. Most people are nice, like right, like most
Yeah,
people are
absolutely.
willing to give you their time. I saw some of the stuff you did. I said, hey, man. We'd love to have you on the show. I think you do some cool stuff. I think you have some cool stories you'd love to share. And you were like, yeah, sure. That sounds great. This is awesome. So, appreciate you again and appreciate everyone that I've been able to reach out to. And is that nice? And yeah, just do more of it. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like,
I'll give
nothing.
another small story. So, like I said, I grew up idolizing the work of Scoop Jackson. And through Anthony Gilbert, who actually knew Scoop Jackson is now with ESPN, but he gave me, I didn't know Scoop lived in Chicago, growing up. So I was like, wow, this guy's a Chicago resident. I wrote Scoop a handwritten letter to his house. Scoop actually returned, like, wrote back to me. I was just like, what the hell? I was like, Scoop Jackson wrote back to me in a letter. So, like I said, this dates myself, but I met Scoop at finally in person at a Chicago Bulls Washington Wizards game, and I was so nervous because this is the guy who I changed what sports writing was, what I viewed it as. I was like, I was so scared to meet him, and as soon as he met me, pulled me in, gave me a big hug, and like from that point, I can call Scoop Jackson now on my phone, ask him how the family is doing, and just to see how far I've come and growing up reading this man's work, and now I can text him, now I can call him, still pick his brain. It's crazy, but that all came from networking. That all came from not being scared to write this guy a letter who had no idea who I was. I'm just a kid from Chicago, and I'm writing a letter and sending it to his house. He didn't know didn't know who I was, didn't know how I got his address, but the fact that he responded and we met, I think like a year or two later, and how he embraced me and welcomed me in to his home, to his family. Like it's like I said, that all came from networking and not being afraid to, put myself out there. And like I said, I'm indebted to him like always, just because, if it's not for him, then I may still do sports writing, but I don't know if I would have felt the confidence that, I could put my voice to it, without, reading his words, Russ Bankston words, and everything that everybody over at Slam was doing.
That is beautiful, man. That is awesome. What a great way to end it, because I think that's such an important story for people to understand. So I don't need to comment too much on that. But Chris, this has been absolutely fantastic. Where can we find some of your writing? Where can we follow you on social media? Give us all the links. Give us all the handles.
Definitely. Well, everything that I post goes on to my Twitter. Twitter C4 Dunk. I'm on Instagram. I'll post some stuff on there too, but not too much. I try to, decompress from social media as much as possible. But yeah, definitely Twitter, C4 Dunk. You can find all my stuff there.
I love it, man. Well, I'll put that in the show notes for everyone. And yeah, if you spend too much time on Twitter, you shouldn't be on social media for your mental well-being. Get out. It's the worst place on
Not
planet
at
Earth.
all.
A lot of good things
Absolutely.
happen there, but mostly it's just terrible. I hate it, but I do it too, man. I do it too. But no, man, Chris, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for giving me some of your time. Thank everybody out there listening for giving me theirs. Time is the only thing we don't get more of. So I really, really do appreciate you giving me a little bit of it. But other than that, man, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone listening. Bye,
No
everybody.
problem. Thank you.